I think we are live. Hello, everyone. Very welcome. We have a really exciting workshop ahead of us this afternoon. Teamed up, we're here with the guys from Visualsoft. We'll do a quick introduction in a second, but topic of today's workshop is going to be where should you spend your next pound? Where should your next pound go? So getting into forecast-led channel allocation, something that we necessarily don't touch on a whole lot at Store Hero, but it's something I'm really excited to get into the weeds of with today. We're going to go for a round of intros, but before we do, I'd love everyone in the chat right now to just pop in their name and what kind of city they're dialing in from around the world today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Thomas. I'm co-founder here at Store Hero. We're essentially a tool to help e-commerce brands and agencies centralize e-commerce marketing and finance information. What does that mean and why is it useful? We want to help you understand, as you're spending more money on ads, are you generating more profit as a result up front? And I'm going to pass it over to Luke from the Visualsoft team to introduce himself and give a quick explainer as to who you are and where you're dialing in from today.
Hi everyone, lovely to be here. Thanks very much, Thomas. My name's Luke. I'm our digital strategy director at Visualsoft. I work with a lot of our clients and digital delivery teams to, address the point of what you've just outlined there, which is where do we spend our budgets, where do we allocate the next pound, how do we decide, what is the right place to spend and where to pull back.
Nice. Yeah, we've got an exciting one locked in today now, Luke, so really excited to get into it. Before we get in, I can see that we have Margot dialing in from Bristol, Johnny from Go Quick dialing in from York, Clara from Cork. Nice to see some Irish on the board there as well. Nicole from Go Quick dialing in from Bedford, and Tom Watkins down in Brighton. So good mix across Ireland and the UK this afternoon. Don't be shy, guys. If you're on there, don't be shy to kind of drop in where you're coming from. And as we kind of dial through the session today, don't be afraid to drop in any questions. As it goes without saying, there is no silly questions. Anything that pops up, comes to your mind, just drop it in and we'll do our best to get to it. Okay, without further ado, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and build a forecast within Store Hero. So, the topic of today's conversation, where should your next marketing pound go? And then we're going to get into forecast-led channel allocation. What does that mean? Great. Where should you spend your next euro, your next pound, your next dollar? Facebook, Google, demand capture, demand creation. What does that even mean? Upper funnel, bottom of funnel. We'll get in, demystify all those terms and really get into it. But first and foremost, before we even think about where we're going to spend the money, we need to figure out how much we can afford to spend in the first place. And that's what we're going to do right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, just making sure that everybody can see that. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead into Store Hero and drop down into goals, and I'm going to create a brand new forecast from scratch. So why are we starting with this? We've worked with, there's probably 650 e-commerce businesses using Store Hero now all around the world, which is great. And, some of the feedback we got from some of our clients last year was, the tool is great. We can see all the information there, but sometimes we don't know how much we should be spending. We can see that sales went up by 10% last week. We can see spend went up by 15%. We can see Facebook ROAS, blah, blah, blah. But we don't necessarily know, is that number good? Is it in line with what we need to do as a business? Does it take into account that we always have a really bad February every year? Does it take into account we need to be profitable this year? Does it take into account that we've just raised cash? We don't need to be profitable. How does the platform adjust and react? So what we essentially built was a really simple and easy mechanism to help brands understand exactly how much they should be spending in order to make their business tick and make it work. So first and foremost, what we're going to start here with is a profit first forecast. So we're going to work backwards from 4 things that every e-commerce business should know to be true. And they are your sales figure. We know your COGS. We know your operating expenses to run your business, your fixed costs, your payroll, your rent, your software fees, that kind of thing. And the last thing we'd love to get from you is what your profit goal is. How much money do you need from this business to make it commercially interesting or viable for the next 12 to 18 months, whatever the case may be. Now, you'll notice what I haven't asked the business there is what your marketing budget is. And that's what we're here to figure out today. So let's just say we want to do 1.3 million in net sales. Store Hero knows what our fully loaded cost of goods are. And for anybody, just a quick recap on that. Product COGS or cost of goods sold. I know this is a marketing webinar. People are wondering why we're getting into the weeds of this stuff. cost of goods sold, particularly from an e-commerce standpoint, are a little bit different to maybe high street retail. And what's the difference there? It's not just our product. We've got transaction fees, we've got shipping costs, we've got discounts, we've got return fees, 3PL costs. There's so many little paper cuts that go into the margin of every single order that we need to be very, very sure of. And once we get any clients kind of set up on the free trial within Store Hero, the fully loaded COGS figure, usually populates there. And often, to be honest with you, it can be a little bit higher than anticipated. Next piece there, as we said, is the operating expenses and the profit goal. So if we go over here and we look at the full pie, this is the full sales figure for the business. We want to do 1.3 million. We can see here, COGS are going to be about 50% of that. So the full orange part here is gone straight away to get those products to our customers. The red part here is our rent costs, it's our salaries, it's our software fees, whatever the case may be. And the green part here is our profit. This is the bill that we need to pay ourselves in order to make the business commercially interesting or viable. What we've essentially done there is work backwards to figure out, okay, if this is our sales target, these are our margins, these are our costs and our profit objectives. That means we can afford to spend 268,000 to go and make this all happen. So what it's showing us here is if we have 268K, we need to spend that at an efficiency rate of 4.84. And if we can do that, we go back and we hit 1.3 million, hit our COGS figure, clear our fixed costs, and most importantly, hit that profit bill there, or that profit objective. Just a quick one there as we kind of rip through this. Is this a setup or a framework or a way of forecasting that anybody in the channel has done previously? How different is it to what you previously do? Any immediate questions that jump up on it? And while those questions are coming in there, I'm just going to touch back here to one piece I always think is quite interesting is being able to just toy around, particularly with the COGS piece. And people are probably wondering, well, our product costs are our product costs. We can't necessarily change them. I think you can. And I don't necessarily think it's mainly just your product costs. But if we go into an order, are you giving free shipping away? Do you have free returns? What kind of payment provider are you using? Do you have a 3PL? Do they double charge you for your returns, whatever the case may be? There can be different ways to optimize either our discounting strategy, our free shipping strategy, or returns policies, payment providers that can increase our gross margin, which can have profound impacts on how much we can afford to spend. So again, we're still on this topic of figuring out how much we can afford to spend. Let's just say hypothetically, we've done a lot of work and we think we can get our COGS down from 49% to 45%. What's the impact of that, and why are we even talking about this? Right now, with the current structure, we can afford to spend 268K. So let's just see what happens if we can drop this to 45. So we're dropping our COGS from 50%, call it, to 45%. Okay, we've just gone ahead and created an imaginary 50K out of the sky, and all we've done is just dropped our COGS from 49 to 45. It's gone from being able to spend 275K to being able to spend 325K, and the efficiency rate that we need to spend it at has, dropped as well. So what we're doing there is we're increasing the chances of us hitting that target. We all know the best way to grow an e-commerce business is going to be by giving ourselves more paid spend to be able to hit it. We just want to make sure that we have ourselves structurally set up as well as possible in order to make it all tick and make it all work as well. Okay, so we've built the forecast. We've figured out we can spend 325K. We know we need to hit an efficiency rate of 4. Next piece we want to jump into is, okay, where does that need to happen in terms of different months of the year? So I'm going to go ahead and hit next. What's essentially happened now is Store Hero has looked at our previous last 12 months of sales, and we can see all of the seasonal peaks and troughs. We know e-commerce is quite a seasonal industry, I suppose, overall. Most businesses have their kind of peak around Q4, October, November, December, which is no surprise. So we can't take the 1.3 million and divide it by 12. We can see there, based on last year's seasonality, obviously, which we can adjust. It breaks us out a full forecast, not just for sales, but for marketing spend. And Luke will be running through how we split that up between Meta and Google in a few minutes. Marketing spend that we can afford to spend each month, net profit goals, how many orders we need in different months of the year, how many new customers, repeat customers, customer acquisition costs, that kind of thing. So what this does is give us a clear and easy mechanism to help understand what we should be delivering each month. So Tom has a quick question in there. What's the easiest thing we can do to lower our COGS? Okay, yeah, good question. So I kind of touched on some of them there. One of the traps and challenges we see with a lot of the brands that come to us is that they perceive everything as a marketing problem. Everything is a Facebook ads or a Google ads issue. And, sometimes that's true, by the way, but certainly not all the time. We want to, like, the best businesses that we see in Store Hero are not the ones that are consistently trying to get their CAC as low as possible, get their ROAS as high as possible. In some ways, the businesses who are trying to figure out, okay, what is the optimal offer structure that we can create that is attractive enough to our customers, but that ultimately allows us to scale at the highest cost to acquire customers while doing so profitably. And you're probably thinking, why are we on a webinar here? Why are we on a workshop where he's advocating for us to kind of push for a higher CAC? Ultimately, when we're in Meta and Google and we're looking for customers, we're bidding on customers, you're in a bidding war. So, let's just say we have two companies and they're both selling black mugs. If one company has, £20 of gross margin on first order and one company has £5 of gross margin on first order, which company is going to grow and scale the highest? It's going to be the one that has the most margin up front to go and acquire customers at doing so profitably. So I just think that's such an underrated point. So to answer your question, Tom, how do we think about lowering our COGS? There's a number of different facets to it. Discounting is one. Are you discounting too much? If you are discounting, what is the impact that it's having on your customer acquisition cost? Is it sufficient enough to outweigh the margin cut that you've taken? Second piece is just really looking and digging into your returns policy. I think we can all see, like, the likes of ASOS's, Pretty Little Things, these historically fast fashion brands who would have had free returns over the past number of years have all tightened up on that. Everybody's charging for returns now. If you're not, you're probably leaving money on the table, again, from a margin perspective. And same for your shipping. A good rule of thumb, we always say, kind of 20% above your average order value is a good rule of thumb for where your free shipping threshold should sit. We actually did an exercise, a COGS optimization exercise with a brand about 6 months ago. We actually managed to get their gross margin on first purchase, which was around £40, up to about 60. That's a 50% increase in terms of what they can afford to spend to hit the exact same customer. So what happened there? They were able to massively scale the ad account, afford a higher customer acquisition cost, get on a lot more new customers, but essentially not be any worse off from a profitability standpoint. The business was in a position where they weren't ultimately chasing profitable. They didn't want to be super, super profitable. They were okay with where they were at, but they needed a lot more higher volume and higher scale. So by digging into the first offer structure, by freeing up more margin on that first purchase, what it did was allow them to scale the business with a higher customer acquisition cost, but not necessarily without sacrificing any margin or profit in the business in the first place. So hopefully that answered your question, Tom. If it hasn't, obviously, by all means, continue to drop a message in there. Okay, so just to recap here before we jump off this and pass it over to yourself, Luke. So what we've done now is we've built out a forecast. It's mapped out to our commercial outcomes. We've mapped out a 1.3 million sales goal for the year. We know what our marketing spend is, and that's purely a derivative of the margins that we have, the fixed costs that we have, and the profitability goals or objectives that we have. We've worked backwards to now figure out that we can afford to spend 325K. So the next thing I'm going to do here is click finish. So what's going to happen now is, instead of me just logging into Store Hero and seeing number good, number bad, number up, down 10%, whatever the case may be, we can now see very quickly here that sales are up by 4%, but we are 21% behind target. Ad spend is up 38%, but we're massively under budget, actually 73% behind target. That being said, from an efficiency standpoint, this is MER for anyone who's not immediately familiar with it, kind of like a business level ROAS. If ROAS is on a channel and a campaign level, MER is kind of on a business level. We're a lot more efficient than we need to be here. And as a result, our kind of contribution margin, anyone not familiar with that tool, that kind of metric or number, it's essentially profit after marketing spend and after all of your COGS. So as a business, this is the main number that you're trying to increase or influence at all times. Even though we've missed our sales target, we're under budget, we're so much more efficient than we need to be that we're actually ahead of our profit target. Now, if I was advising these guys, I would say, you're so under budget, we're 73% behind the target. I wouldn't necessarily just jump 2 feet in and make sure that we hit that target next week. But what I would be thinking is, can we continue to increase the budgets by 10 or 20% each week? making sure that as we do so, that the profit number is continuing to rise from there. Just before I pass it over to yourself, Luke, within here we have the insights layer. So instead of just logging into the tool and needing to do our own interpretation to see what do we do next, as an example, let's just pick, okay, sales from new customers is 26% behind target. So, why has that happened? And most importantly, what are we going to do about it? So we've kind of taken a slightly different approach with the AI here. Instead of just giving you a chatbot to ask any question, because we have the forecast in there, I know what you should have delivered in terms of new customer numbers last week. I know how much you should have spent on ads. I know what kind of profit number that we were searching for. So basically what we've done is triangulated everything that should have happened versus what has happened. And we're going to give you a bit of a synopsis and a summary of it. So we can see sales from new customers is down 26%. This was affected by pretty much a 0% drop in new customers, but we did see a 12% increase in new customer AOVs. So we can see there where the number is versus last period, last year, and versus target. Any of the likely causes, it's pretty much telling us marketing spend is only 2.9K, below the target of 10. So that's limiting the new customer acquisition massively. So that's why we're behind target. We can see any of the supporting data. So it's going to pull in any of the channels that we're operating on, anything here that could be related to new customers. Where are we versus target and versus last month? And then most importantly, down the bottom, this kind of segues nicely into your own piece here, Luke. Suggested next steps in where and how and which campaigns we should be dialing up the budgets. So again, this is kind of retrospectively based on what's happened. These are the campaigns that you should push, that you should pull on. But what we have done right now is we built a mechanism to understand what an optimum marketing spend budget could look like, based on the commercial reality that we face as a business, but also based on the seasonality and profitability goals. So we've worked out in this situation that we can now go ahead and spend 325K as long as we maintain an efficiency rate of, I think it was 4. Now, I'm going to pass it over to yourself, Luke, because this is where you guys really come in, is getting into, which channels to spend it on. We have loads of conversations with brands where the split between Meta and Google can be quite variable, and that's for a good reason. Some brands they have a great brand there already. Other brands are trying to start out. Some brands are resellers of other brands. Top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. It can be quite a myriad and complex set of questions to, advise any brand on. So with that, I'll pass it over to yourself, and looking forward to getting into it from there.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. No, fantastic stuff there. And I think even as marketers, we absolutely need to take into account the profitability of the business, the cost of products. And this is something that, ultimately I don't see enough businesses taking into account when they are looking at setting the budgets, or the data is simply very difficult to surface and to understand. And naturally having a tool like Store Hero can help dramatically. However, I guess from our perspective, so for context, when we're kind of thinking about where should a brand spend its next pound, where should a business spend its next pound, you alluded to a critical point there, Thomas, which was, I guess, getting into the demand model, which is it's usually much easier to say we'll spend all of our budget at the demand capture side of the equation, which is paid search, paid Google, it might be Bing, and so on and so forth. Essentially the paid media and ad side of things, and partly because it's generally a lot easier to track the performance and the return and the impact of some of those capture based channels. But at the same time, if there is no demand or we're not generating a demand, then generally what we'll find is that we see businesses where the rising cost of ads just keeps going up. It never goes down. Every year there's more competition in the market, margins are tighter, and usually it actually compounds to create a much harder conversation around, maybe we do just keep putting all of our money into Google ads and we just keep putting more and more budget in, and the diminishing returns, try and ride that out a little bit. But there is a far better model, which is to try and understand the kind of full demand picture around, are you driving enough awareness of the brand, of the product from a paid social perspective? How are you tracking the value of paid social? If you're looking at it purely through, say, Meta, you're probably going to very quickly find that it's all attributed revenue. You'll be able to pick holes in it very, very easily. It's ultimately quite difficult to then prove the value of something like that. But if you look at it holistically, as I pulled the lever in Meta, we increased our spend on Meta by 10%. What we actually was our paid search performance on Google therefore went up. We were able to generate more demand for our capture channels to then go through and actually win the business. The $1 million point being, how much does all of that cost? Looking at ROAS on a channel by channel level is usually quite suboptimal. You might have a very strong ROAS on Google Ads and a very weak ROAS on Meta or Pinterest or TikTok, or even if you were looking at it from not a return on advertising spend, but what is the organic search piece? How much traffic are you getting organically, or is the business essentially being fueled by paid ad costs right across the kind of traffic spectrum? Having that holistic view of, this is my total cost of sale, this is my total ROAS, this is my total profitability, is super important, because otherwise it's very easy to just say, let's not invest into the demand generation side of things, such as social or SEO. I guess the search landscape is currently going through one of the biggest changes that it's ever gone through. Yeah, maybe since Google launched, with the advent of most users are now starting to get answers directly in the search result, that they're never actually clicking through to a business. The kind of rise of no-click search and AI overviews and LLMs are becoming more and more the place where users get their answers. We know that those tools are now monetizing naturally. Tools like Google, ChatGPT, Perplexity, and so on. They're obviously introducing advertising. They're introducing the surfacing of
Yeah.
product. Shopify very recently said that you'll be able to purchase from within ChatGPT without ever actually landing on the merchant's website, card details, transaction, and all. How on earth do we decide kind of where to invest in that landscape? And it is certainly trying to look at the full demand capture landscape and making sure that we're not just pumping more and more ad cost into something like Google search. It's a very important channel for a lot of businesses. It's the lifeblood of the channel, but it absolutely cannot sustain itself over the long term by just consistently increasing the spend on Google Ads, because it's pretty easy to monitor the return on that. But it's all about that demand capture side of things. We break it into four sections, I guess. We have demand research, which is your creative strategy. Is the brand representing itself aesthetically correctly? Is the messaging right? Does it invoke the right emotion in the customer? All the way through to kind of customer personas being, once we understand the persona, we know where they go, we know where to spend the money. If your persona is spending a lot of time on YouTube or Reddit, then are you there? Are you trying to find them? Generation and capture are the two channels that a lot of people have heard of. You could also refer to that as kind of upper funnel, lower funnel, and everything in between. And then finally, the retention piece, which is, from a profitability standpoint, a lot of businesses don't consider how their budget's going to be spent retaining customers, whether it's a Klaviyo, a customer engagement strategy, WhatsApp, and so on.
Yeah.
It's often quite overlooked.
Yeah. No, yeah, completely. I'm looking forward to getting into the retention piece, but just on the splits, because we get this question all the time. Where's everybody spending their money? Is the shift going from Meta, from Google, from TikTok, Pinterest, Bing, whatever the case may be? Like, broad strokes, Luke, and I'm sure it's very much a varied answer. Like, what is the allocation split on a percentage basis across the channels for an average brand?
So we see a lot of clients who are very heavy in Google Ads. So it might be in the region of kind of 80-20 budget allocation towards Google Ads. We would usually at that point, if we were then hired to come in and start unpicking that a little bit, is try and get that more towards a 60-40 split in favor of more social-led channels, purely from the demand generation
So
perspective.
moving from, just to double click on that, so moving from like an 80-20 Google Meta, Google being the bigger one, to what you're trying to do in a lot of cases, move that to 60-40, but the 60 being almost more meta driven, 40% Google.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. Yeah. And generally, the reason why we see that is that the ROAS generally in that 80-20 favor of Google, we see that ROAS is being compounded over time. It's getting lower and lower, and performance is getting worse. Budgets are going up, and generally, the business is asking questions like, well, what other channels should we be activating? How much more budget am I going to have to put in this year to get that 10% growth, that 20% growth? And the answer is, if it's 80-20 in favor of Google ads, you're going to have to put a lot more budget in order to keep up with the diminishing returns of that. However, if you can then kind of, and it's a big decision, it's a scary decision for a lot of businesses to think about how they then move more towards that 60-40 in favor of the upper funnel, the demand generation side of things. The most important thing is robust tracking. You have to have a solution for how you see the value of that investment into those upper funnel channels. And if you don't have that clear view, then it will invariably be a very, very scary proposition to put more money into Meta, or even other social channels. TikTok is obviously a huge, huge generator for certain businesses at the moment.
Yeah.
If you're not tapping into that, then you're losing out on a huge amount of audience. And naturally, these channels fuel one another. I try not to think of it as what I put in Meta gets X and what I put in Google gets X. I look at what I put into Google and Meta gets X, and
Yeah.
have a that more holistic view of each one is a lever that we can pull. But if we're only working with one lever, then it's much more difficult to achieve growth.
Yeah, no, 100%. Interesting. And even within that, like, what are some of the main challenges, I suppose, that you see brands get into when, or is there any traps that they're falling into? One of the traps I typically see sometimes is, and I think you've kind of alluded to this a little bit, is maybe using ROAS as a crutch or an aid. And what I mean by that is maybe getting sometimes fooled by just branded search campaigns with a whopper ROAS, and then pumping all your money into Google, and maybe not pumping into discovery channels like Meta at a fast enough clip, and then it's kind of seeing a bit of a downstream impact on volume of new customers.
Absolutely. I think blended ROAS is often, and this is a very simple metric that's actually reasonably easy to calculate. Most businesses are still viewing ROAS on a channel by channel basis, which means every channel is ultimately only on its own. So,
Yeah.
if we want to move the needle on Google Ads, the only real thing that can be done is put more money in. Yes, there are optimizations that can be done, but that only goes so far. The real question is, if my blended ROAS is 8, 9, 12, whatever that might be, and I'm able to move these multiple levers. It could be YouTube advertising, it could be Reddit advertising, and that drives an overall increase in overall revenue,
Mm.
profit, and ROAS. There's a lot more there for me to work with
Yeah.
than if it's just kind of Google ads on its own or Meta ads on its own. Having all of those different tools at your availability. But the tracking is the important bit. Most CFOs that I work with, they want to see money in, money out. Once
Of
you get
course.
into that Meta world, it's much more difficult to get that number. But not if we look at it from a blended marketing perspective. So altogether, all of my advertising, all of my return, this is what we got. If I
Yeah.
make changes here, then it moves the needle here. And that is a much better way to think about how to allocate those budgets, because otherwise it's actually quite common to say we simply wouldn't ever invest in social channels from a purely financial perspective. If I was just using metadata,
Mm.
probably never do it, because it's very, very difficult to prove the value. So yeah, proving that value is the absolute first point of call.
Okay, so let's just take two brands. Okay, let's just take a brand new supplement brand. Operation maybe 3 to 4 years, doing okay, trying to get it to the next level. Maybe didn't have a great year last year, and
Yeah,
then compare
yeah,
that to maybe a more legacy reseller of electronics, a high street retailer who has an e-commerce arm as well. Very different businesses for a number of different reasons. In terms of, I suppose, let's just imagine they both landed on 325K as their allowable marketing budget for the year. Both of those brands have very different brand recognition, different margin structures, different everything. How would you think about the channels percentage split for both of those businesses in terms of Meta versus Google, and why? Putting
So
you in the spot here.
I think for the emerging, no, absolutely, it's a very common question. I think for the emerging brand, you would naturally lean more towards capture, purely because it's easier to, I guess, monitor the return on that. So if you are, building the brand awareness, yes, there is an argument for you need to invest quite heavily into social channels, but the budget of the business probably doesn't allow for that. Ultimately, at that stage in the business's journey, so capturing as much demand as possible to fuel the growth of the business. The I guess the mistake that those businesses often make is that they never then switch to an investment in the upper funnel. It essentially remains an investment into demand capture forever. It becomes kind of the understood. It's comfortable, and then eventually the kind of business sees this kind of growth, and then it flattens out, and
Yeah,
then the question is asked. Well, we've peaked. How do we now get more revenue through the business? And the ultimate answer is it has to be through demand generation, and it's that flip from capture to
yeah,
generation that needs to happen. At the same time, for the other business who probably has a larger budget, maybe better margins, things like that, they
yeah,
would have more. I would recommend a more balanced approach, to make sure that both the capture and demand side of things are working the way that they should be. And not to worry as well. I mean, we mentioned there that there are two essential channels, but actually we shouldn't forget the retention piece as well, which is once we've actually won the customer, it's much cheaper to generate a repeat purchase than it is to win the customer the first time. And so not overlooking your investment into we call it customer engagement, but it would encapsulate things like WhatsApp, SMS, email, the general CRM piece of the business. Are we
mm,
cultivating that as well, and particularly conversion rate as well. We've talked a lot there about where to spend the next pound, but I'm always a very big advocate of conversion rate optimization. If
sure.
I'm spending tens of thousands of pounds sending clicks from my advertising to a particular PDP or product page, and
Yeah,
ultimately the conversion rate isn't as optimal as it could be, it's purely wasted money. It needs to be looked at by a kind of CRO scientist, let's say, to say actually we could get more from our current spend if we just improve the conversion rate of this page a little bit. And a lot of businesses who do invest in CRO, they do see much more efficient marketing efficiency ratios and generally better margin as well, because they're not having to spend as much money because less is being wasted.
yeah. No, I completely agree with that. Yeah, we've done some audits on brands over the years, and what appears to be a meta ads problem when you dig into it is actually just a bounce rate issue based on
Yeah.
something that's gone wrong on the front end of the website. And we're here trying to tweak the copy of the ad, the CTA, blah, blah, blah. But if the website's just slow, very much first and foremost, it's just going to make everything a lot harder for us overall. Okay, interesting. So I can see some of the guys from Go Quicker on the call here as well. You mentioned the retention piece. You mentioned WhatsApp there. Is that an area that you're kind of digging into a lot more with clients these days?
Yeah, so one of the big challenges that we had, and I go back to that point around if I was set the objective of we need to grow this business by 20% in this financial year, um, what we can't then fall into the trap of is limiting the amount of levers that we can pull in order to achieve that. It's
Sure.
very easy to launch social campaigns, to integrate with TikTok, and to spend some money advertising on those channels, or to put more money into Google Ads. But from the retention side of things, it's often very overlooked. Businesses will send an email, but do they have automated flows in place through their kind of CDP, whether it's Klaviyo or a Bloomreach or a MailChimp or something of that nature. But cultivating that user once they've actually made the purchase so that we don't have to spend as much money on ads, to get them to come back and make that second purchase, third purchase, and ultimately trying to look at lifetime value. Our
Yeah.
customer engagement teams would generally look at LTV as the main kind of metric. So are we getting the
Yeah.
most from the people that we've won? And naturally then leading into the CRO piece, which I've already mentioned, is a huge boon if we can crack that. Sometimes the website might follow all of the best practices. It looks great. Everybody, we're in the business. We think it's great. And then we look at a user actually interacting with the website. We do a bit of user testing. I always like the use of Microsoft Clarity to just watch how people are interacting with a website and where they're dropping out, and usually that leads to a huge kind of moment to say, well, actually, we've been wasting our money spending that on additional ad costs. What we could have done was optimize that page there.
I've just dropped a quick link there for Microsoft Clarity into the chat as well. If you haven't used it
Fantastic
before,
tool.
yeah, quite a humbling experience sometimes when it's your own site to see why are people not doing what they should be doing. But very much a great learning curve nonetheless as well,
Yeah,
because you could be
absolutely.
surprised at how people are clicking on different things or they don't see certain things. And, to your point, some small little tweaks here and there can improve not just conversion rates, but as a byproduct, all of your efficiency on your marketing as a direct result of that as well. Okay, any tips or advice for any of the listeners here today, Luke, from kind of across the loads of accounts that you guys are working with? I'm sure you see plenty of interesting insights.
Well, I think sometimes having kind of a core vision, something along the lines of kind of revenue versus profit, but profit being sanity and revenue being vanity. It depends what the objective of the business is. If you are aiming for profit, then I think there are very different levers to pull in that regard. If you're trying to win market share and ultimately, you're not too worried about making a profit on that first sale, for example, then there are very different tactics. We see huge amounts of current kind of downstream gain from channels like YouTube and TikTok. Reddit is massively overlooked in general. If we looked at this from an AI perspective, the two biggest contributors to things like Google's number one positions now are YouTube and Reddit. They are huge I guess, suppliers of data to AI overviews, whether it's Gemini or ChatGPT. So if we're thinking about this from an investment perspective, it's a lot cheaper to invest in an organic strategy than it is to just continuously invest more in a paid ads strategy. Yes, it takes longer to see the return, and it's an ongoing thing. The world of SEO is often plagued by the how long will it be till I get a return. But
Yes.
yeah, my take on that is once you've got that working, it's free traffic essentially at that point. Yes, you've got to maintain it, you've got to produce the content. That's what a good SEO agency will do. Now we've got this world of AI is turning it all on its head, and everybody who was number one in Google's now not the citable source anymore within these engines. That's a massive
Crazy.
challenge. We've seen a lot of businesses lose kind of upwards of 20% of their traffic just from the fact that users are getting the answer in Google without ever clicking through to a client's business anymore. Are you tackling that? Because if you aren't, you're going to have to buy that traffic back through paid advertising, and that's going to be very, very expensive. Comparatively, an investment into search engine optimization or generative engine optimization, all of these different buzzwords flying around, but ultimately an investment into the organic side of things might actually be the most profitable investment that you can make at that point, because once it's there, it's going to serve the business well for many, many years to come. Yeah.
Interesting one. I suppose it's not even off topic. It probably is completely on topic. It's probably something people are thinking more and more about. But as a percentage split of your channel allocation spend, going back to the 325K, are people now diverting some of that budget and cash towards, you kind of mentioned SEO, geo, essentially trying to get themselves ripe and ready to be listed within the AI platforms? I'd love to hear a little bit about that, if that's something that you guys have kind of come across.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you've had any kind of tips or recommendations in terms of, if you have, just keep it simple, 100 quid to spend, 60 on Meta, 20 on Google, how much is going into geo or SEO, or ballpark, how should people be getting ready first?
20% of total marketing budget should be going into SEO, GEO, in my humble opinion.
Wow.
Partly because that is still a drop in the water compared to the ad cost potential of what it might cost to keep up with that from a Google Ads perspective. But at the same time, we don't know exactly what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months. Will Google force AI mode as the standard for all Google searches? If it does, we'll see much more of an
It's the
impact on
trillion-dollar
traffic.
question.
$1 trillion question, absolutely. We've already seen them start to monetize, those
Yeah.
AI overview results. I think that we'll see the ability to advertise directly within, AI mode and things like that quite quickly. Shopify are obviously seeing this as well as a huge investor into this space, and now they're moving towards, you don't ever need to visit the Shopify store. You can just buy it straight from ChatGPT. They know that that's going to be how users shop and purchase in the future. I think if you're not thinking about that impact, what you might find is that one day you'll wake up, there'll be a massive Google update. You'll have lost 20, 30, 40% of your organic traffic. And the only lever you'll have at that point is to invest more in ads, which is cripplingly expensive. However, if we start thinking about it now and putting the business in the right position for how do you position the business as an authority, how do you get cited in AI, do you know how often you're getting cited by these AI tools, is a good starting point. That sets the business up to kind of build a moat around the business to protect from some of these big changes that are coming down the line.
And is it old school SEO?
Oh, that's yeah. If you go on LinkedIn, you will get multiple takes on is SEO dead, is GEO the new thing, all of these kind of hot
Yeah,
takes. Good SEO is still good SEO, and it will help to get you cited by AI engines. Yes, there are some nuances, such as making sure the website has good schema so that AI can actually read it. But the big one is trying to position the business as an authority. So if you make your own product, then you should naturally be able to develop an authoritative presence that the AI engine can cite. If you sell other brands, if you're a multi-brand retailer, then you need to position yourself as an expert in X, Y, and Z topical areas. Now, that could be as simple as having a very, very well-maintained blog, knowledge base, but more and more we're seeing that if I write 100 blogs, it's probably going to produce a tenth of the impact of one YouTube video, if we were looking at it from
interesting.
the perspective. And it's really difficult, right? Because producing a video is a hell of a lot more difficult and more expensive than writing even 100 blogs potentially.
Yeah,
Do not use AI to write blogs. Google is very, very, very good at spotting what content has been produced by AI and naturally penalizes it quite a bit, and so on and so forth. And I think there is a question there in the chat actually.
Henry's popped in one good point. Does increasing target ROAS help on lowering the CPA? If not, how can we lower it? Um, yeah, I mean, look, technically, yes. If you increase the target ROAS that you need to get more efficient. You will lower your CPA. That sounds obvious. It's something that you should do. But what I would probably pose a question back is the ultimate goal of the business to have the highest ROAS and the lowest CPA, or is it to grow the biggest and most profitable business? Um, you will struggle. Like ultimately, when you set a ROAS target, you're setting a cap to Facebook or Google or whoever it might be, saying we are willing to pay X for this customer. Now, if you set that on the floor, just take a quick example. You set it at £5. You will get some customers at £5, but they're probably going to be the customers who are very close to buying anyway. They've been on your website, they were on the checkout, they didn't quite get over the line, but they're going to look for the lowest hanging fruit and serve those customers first. Um, but you won't have a massive pool of those customers. So what I would probably say is just think about what is the target CPA that you need versus the one that you want. Because again, going back to that point, trying to figure out what the target marketing budget for the year should be, you should be able to retroactively work backwards from that. And if you don't, or you can't work it out, obviously just ping us a question on it. But you should be able to work backwards to figure out, okay, this is actually the target CAC, target CPA that we can afford as a business. And if that's higher than you might initially think, that's probably a good thing because it means A, that you can afford it if you've got it set up correctly. But B, what it will do is if you can afford instead of £5, I don't know, just call a spade here, £25, you've now opened the aperture of which Meta can go and look for new customers way more than just serving the ads to the people who are about to purchase anyway. So not a great, well, I'll be just thinking about it maybe in a slightly different way. The goal here is not to get the CPA as low as possible. It's to set ourselves up in a way that we understand what we can scale to with different types of CPAs. You can get a CPA or 100 ROAS if you want, but you probably won't be able to spend more than £2 or £3 a day. So that limits your growth to being £200 or £300 a day in revenue, which isn't going to be very self-serving for anybody. Cool. Just before we wrap up, if anyone has any questions, please pop them in the channel. Luke, if people are looking to get in touch with yourself, where can they find you?
You can absolutely add me on LinkedIn. Obviously, the guys at Store Hero have got my email address. More than happy to share that for anybody that wants to reach out more privately or directly. But yeah, always active on LinkedIn if anyone wants to add me and drop me a chat on there.
Brilliant. I've just popped Luke's LinkedIn there into the channel. It doesn't look like we have any other questions right now. So if that's all for today, we'll leave it there. If anyone has any follow-up questions, obviously please ping myself or ping Luke directly. Or you can log on to the storehero.ai website or the Visualsoft website as well for more information. Thanks very much. Hopefully that was beneficial and useful, and looking forward to catching up with you all again very, very soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys. Cheers.